The year is flawed and things are going well at the Fukushima Nuclear Power Plant.
Suddenly, the strongest earthquake in Japanese history strikes the island, and the entire building begins shaking, causing furniture to fall all over the workers. In the control room announced an emergency shutdown, managing to cut off the power just in time. As soon as the earthquake ends, the workers immediately begin working on checking the unit status and bringing power back in the city. Prime Minister Azuma decides to cancel today's meeting and lets the officials work on assessing the damage caused by the earthquake at the headquarters of the power company TACO. Vice President Mirakami announces that the main power plants are down and orders everyone to drop whatever they are doing to make restoring power the number one priority at the nuclear reactor buildings. Employees are told to evacuate because of its tsunami warning led by Yoshida. They rush to the only isolated building, and on their way out they notice how many people got hurt in the control room.
They discover the unit is losing pressure too fast, as if it was overcooling.
So they decide to close the valves per procedure. They also discover that water levels are dropping in unit and worry that something may be malfunction. So they send a few men to take a look in the evacuation. Sheltered nearby, people are rushing in, but they sometimes have to stop moving when the area gives an occasional shake. Fury drops his family there before leaving to help with the power issues, even if it's his free day at the power station. 3 workers finally go to check on Unit 4 while crossing the road. They suddenly notice some movement in the sea and are shocked to see a big tsunami incoming. The trio runs away as the Gint wave hits the plant, pushing vehicles and crashing through windows as the remaining workers run away. The trio enters the building of Unit 3, but barely makes it inside before water starts getting in as well. The building starts filling up and all the machines lose power, causing the workers to run in the dark. In the plant's assistance facility, 2 workers are going through the sealed quarters, and the power goes out right before they can go through the last door. So they get stuck. The tsunami is coming closer, and the men try to kick the door, but it's reinforced, and it won't give in at that moment. The wave crashes. The building then breaks, the glass immediately covering one of the men. The other guy's corridor is filling up more slowly, and he tries to keep his head above the water, but the weight is too strong, and soon it's pushing him against the ceiling.
Afterward, the wave hits another generator,
making the building lose power too.
In the control room, they think the ratings of the units are fine, and they don't notice the water running through the quarters on the security cameras. The nearby roads are jammed with traffic, and the plant buildings by the sea are now completely flooded.
Suddenly power goes out in the control room, and they finally notice all generators are inactive before the computer shuts down. In the Prime Minister's Cabinet Crisis Center in Tokyo, news arrived that an article of alert to the government was sent by the plant without checking with Tokyo. First, Mirakami calls Yoshida to demand an explanation and learns that the plant is under blackout. Only the seismic isolated building has enough power from the gas turbine to keep a few lights on. They have no way to know if the reactors are in good condition or not, and Yoshida doesn't know how to proceed, because no training scenario ever prepared for this. For now, they'll continue reviewing the emergency manual and try to develop a response procedure soon.
The government makes a public announcement saying that they haven't received reports of radioactive material affecting the outside, so people don't need to worry about safety in the isolated building. The priority is to find a way to power the control room. So Yoshida sends his men to ask headquarters for mobile generators and to ask the self-defense force for fire trucks in case they have to cool the reactors with water from outside. In the control room, they decide to try using automobile batteries to activate the gauge.
So while a man goes to look for some, they discuss the fact
they'll have to open the valve to let water in order to cool the reactors. Back at the crisis center, Azuma declares a state of nuclear emergency, and this kind is a first in Japan.
They confirm that the Nuclear Disaster Response Center has its access roads cut off, and they have no power or internet signal.
Their only communication means are 6 satellite phones. They act on special measures concerning nuclear emergency preparedness states to immediately direct residents to evacuate, but now they'll have to discuss how to define the evacuation, soon over another press conference.
It's announced that there are no reports of radioactive material, so they won't be evacuating. For now in the control room, a man is sent to the roof to keep an eye on the wave, so he can alert them. If another tsunami comes, 2 other workers go to investigate housing units 1 and 2, walking through the darkness with their little flashlights. Until they make it to the doors that guard the nuclear reactor, suddenly the meter goes crazy, which indicates radioactive contamination in the room, so the workers run away.
They return to the control room to give them the bad news, and when they wonder how they'll manage to build a water injection line when suddenly Chu arrives, revealing that he's picked up full-face masks and meters from the isolated building back to Yoshida. He gets a call letting him know that the Defense Department will send 2 fire trucks, so he calls the control room and asks them to secure a water injection line.
Then, with Fuller leading, a few men are sent to open 5 valve locations in housing units.
1M2.
The team carefully makes its way inside, finding mud everywhere, and even a dead fish when they finally make it to the door protecting the unit, to turbine. They open it and get scared when suddenly the entire structure starts shaking. Thankfully, it stops quickly and nobody gets hurt.
The team makes their way deeper inside, finding water leaking from many spots. Getting to the first valve is easier than expected, and they open it. While in the control room, they start hooking up the car batteries. Then the team goes looking for the next valve, only pause causing when an aftershock makes the building shake. It only takes them a few moments to find valves 2 through 4 and to open them successfully.
Now only number 5 is left.
This valve is kind of stuck, so they have to work together to open it under the pressure of the meter, indicating that the dosage is dangerously going up. After lots of effort, the final valve is also open, but in the control room they notice the water level doesn't go up moments later.
Azuma learns that in less than an hour the nuclear fuel will start to leak. Everyone starts panicking because they told civilians not to evacuate, so Azuma orders his men to make civilians clear the jammed roads with patrol cars so they can transport a power source to the plant.
He also finally issues an evacuation order, but the problem is that they don't know how big to make it because they lack details. In the end, they choose the standard 3 kilometers.
Another press conference announces the evacuation, but they say it's just a precaution.
The control room employees called Yoshida to tell them the valves were open, but the water levels didn't rise, and it's impossible to go back to open more valves because of the radiation level, so they'll have to wait for the fire trucks to inject the water directly. Yoshida explains they aren't sure that trucks will arrive because of the blocked roads, but at that moment news arrived at an electric company from northern Japan has sent a vehicle mounted high-voltage generator.
So they still have a chance. After they inform Azuma of this, the control room team begins to work on trying to find a way to connect the generator, which is proven hard, because the salt water has damaged most switchboards while meltdown time approaches.
The workers finally found a working switchboard in the unit turbine.
They start molding a bunch of cables to make the connection, but unfortunately the mobile generator can't make it all the way to unit because of the roads, which are being blocked by terrible debris, including the cars of people that failed to escape in a seaside tank. They all have to run meters of cable to make the connection, which usually requires heavy machinery because of the weight, but today they all had to do it by hand in the darkness.
The employees begin working hard on moving the cables with only the helmet lights to see the way, having to deal with the occasional tremor.
Suddenly, they notice there's a man missing and find him fallen in the water. So they rush to help him out as they realize he had fallen into a manhole because the tsunami pushed the lid away. At that moment, the ground begins shaking again, and this time the aftershocks are so serious that Yoshida has no choice but to halt the mission for now. Then they get a call from the control room telling them that the reactor pressure is rising in unit up, which means it's never been cooling.
This is because right after the earthquake, they shut down the reactor to prevent overcooling, and they never got to turn it back on because the power went out moments later.
They discovered that the containment vessel pressure has crossed the limit, meaning it'll burst at any moment. Yoshida decides they should move the motor-operated valves for venting, which could possibly release the gas into the atmosphere. Ayuma hears of this plan and wonders if the gas is safe, and an official explains the gas will escape after passing through water, so the radioactivity of it should be notably low. Volume venting has never been tried before anywhere in the world, and the government is worried about the reaching from other nations. There's also the problem of how they'll open the valves without power in the plant. A few workers have entered the administrative building, which is a complete mess. Here, looking for information on the valves to avoid working blind when suddenly another aftershock hits the building. Luckily, nobody gets hurt and they keep going.
Meanwhile, Azuma and his officials continue to discuss the risk of releasing the gas and how wide should the evacuation ratio be. However, since they still lack information, they just talk in circles without reaching a conclusion, with Unit 2 already being too radioactive to be approached.
They worry that at this rate, they'll lose access to Unit 2 says well, and they may end up spawning with no other choice.
Ijma authorizes them to do the venting in the administrative building.
They find the pipping schematics and learn that to create event, someone will have to enter the building and open the valves by hand.
Yoshida calls the control room to pass the information, and now the leader has the devastating task of choosing which workers will go on this dangerous mission in Tokyo.
Another press conference announces they'll proceed with e-vetting, but one of the officials changes the information at the last second and says that Unit is fine. Only Unit will need venting. Ayuma is tired of all his informants being useless and decides he'll travel to Fukushima. By helicopter in the control room, nobody volunteers to do the venting, and when the leader says he'll do it himself. Fur says he'll be the one to go and that the leader should stay here.
This inspires others to volunteer as well.
In the end, they divide the group into 3 teams of 2, and Yoshida orders his men to take all the protective gear they can find and take it to the control room when Azuma finally arrives. A camera follows him everywhere before they are allowed to enter the plant. Everyone is inspected in case there's any contamination, and Azuma's impatience makes him yell at the workers.
When he hears the venting will start in 3 hours because preparations are required,
he starts yelling again, so Yoshida comes with a few maps to explain how long and dangerous the process of opening the valves by hand in the darkness is. At this rate, the workers in charge of the mission won't come back.
Ayuma finally understands the issue and gives his approval before leaving in such a bad mood that he demands that the camera be turned off.
Yoshida calls the control room to inform them
the evacuation of civilians is finished, so the venting mission can finally begin wearing suits and special masks. The team enters the service building where they discover the radiation levels are higher than expected, so they try to hurry up.
These high numbers also reach the government, who are shocked to discover that if the venting doesn't work, the entire ground will reach that level and be exposed to multiple sieverts.
The officials decide to check report about an employee that was exposed to that level of radiation, and they learn how bad the burning can be through a flashback. It's revealed the awful condition that the employee was in, and the poor guy died on the day if they don't complete the venting.
this will be everyone's future. They consider passing this information to Azuma, but he's already in such a bad mood that they decide not to enter Unit Reactor building.
2 workers find the first valve, which is kind of stuck, applying all the strength they can little by little.
They manage to turn it and open it to the right percentage needed for the mission afterward. They rushed back to the control room and call Yoshida to tell him of the valve, but also of the high levels of radiation in the unit.
Yoshida asks them to immediately send the second team in the control room.
The second team suits up and leads, for the unit of reactor building their valve is in an area with no concrete to protect them from the radiation, but they gather their courage and open the door to then cross a very long bridge.
Eventually, the radiation levels are so bad that the dosimeter maxes out, and one of the workers says they should go back. The other refuses, saying saving everyone is more important, but the first one insists they won't reach the valve even if they try. Some struggle ensues and team ends up returning to the control room. The leader reads the residue radiation level on their clothes and confirms it would have been pointless to stay. The radiation levels are slowly going up in the room as well, and when they call Yoshia, he also agrees.
It was too much to deal with and tells them to send team.
Two to a doctor while Yoshida and his team begin discussing new ideas. The junior members of the control room staff ask the leader for permission to leave because they want to see their families, and there isn't anything they can do here. However, the leader offers a speech about how they are the last hope and says that when they reach the point of no return, he'll allow everyone to leave.
But meanwhile, he begs everyone to stay, and the seniors join us.
Please team eventually makes it to the offices, and they are sent to the doctor while Yoshida announces they'll send 2 employees to the control room to replace them. 2 volunteers immediately start getting ready, and before they leave, Yoshida announces.
The recovery team has come up with an idea. If they connect the compressor to the piping, there's a chance. They could apply pressure from outside to open the valve remotely. The chances are low, but they accept to try in parallel with the entry of Team 3.
Meanwhile, while Team is put through a special freezing shower, when they are done, a worker reads the radiation levels, but they are still too high, and they have to wash again. The replacement workers make it to the control room and ask to become Team 3 because they know the route better than anyone thanks to their years spent in the plant. After some hesitance, the leader agrees to the switch at that moment.
Yoshida learns that white smoke is visible from the unit of pipeline and calls the control room to warn them.
The new team has already left, so the leader rushes after to stop them after lots of running. He reaches the dude just in time and drags them back to the control room. While they discuss how to proceed, they receive news that the pressure in the primary containment vessel is finally dropping and the white smoke is actually water. Vapor rising from the reactor, meaning the compressor Yoshida sent out is actually working and the first vent valve is a success outside the unit. Building a group of workers are moving the debris with the help of heavy machinery. This allows for the fire truck to finally arrive, so now they can start working on preparing the water pump. While they get everything connected, they move more debris out of the way and manage to find the water inlet. So with the help of the fire truck, they quickly start pumping water into the building to help with the cooling. Moments later, Yoshida and the driver of the fire truck start discussing the chance of having to use salt water to continue the injection. Once they run out of fresh water, they all have to run a line. So they'll have to go all the way to the war for that. Yoshida should have asked for authorization before sending the order, but he thinks it's a pointless waste of time to ask first since it's an emergency. Suddenly another aftershock hits the buildings, and this time is so strong that it causes some serious damage to the ceilings.
Everyone in the control room immediately puts on masks, wondering what is that boom that they heard.
At that moment, a worker in the office announces that the reactor building's 5th floor is completely gone.
Yoshida runs out and discovers
there are tons of people hurt and the sealed doors have bent. So contamination is now entering this building as well. The Demeter confirms there's no difference between the inside and the outside. Then Yoshida asks his men to seal as many doors as possible and suits up before going outside, where they find more injured men. As soon as he turns around the corner, Yoshida sees the horrible amount of smoke left by the explosion in the reactor building in Tokyo. An official rushes to his office to turn on the news, and now they are able to witness the explosion as well.
Ayama demands information, but nobody has details to share outside the plant. Employees work hard to rescue all the injured people, take care of their wounds, and keep an eye on their contamination levels.
Some workers take care of resealing the doors, while the hose they were connecting to the wharf show signs of damage.
It seems the explosion didn't kill anybody, but the containment vessel is now exposed. Without the hose, they don't know how to proceed, but a worker shows up to announce the outdoor fire hydrants of hoses too, so they'll start the connection from zero in Tokyo.
Reporters aren't discuss the chances of radiation danger, but Topco sends information that they still are.
Hey, an employee explains to a worried Azuma that the building blew up because of hydrogen, not the reactor itself.
So the initial high level of radiation caused by the explosion has returned to normal.
At that moment, Taku calls and informs Azuma's team that a power shortage will occur in the Tokyo area. So they would like to implement rolling blackouts outside the building.
The workers use
The meters to see what pieces of debris they can touch, which makes running the house take too much time.
Yoshida calls them and tells them about the backwash valve pit, which right now should still be flooded from the tsunami.
It's closer than the wharf.
So they'll throw the hose there. Instead, moments later, Azuma receives news that the containment vessel pressure is rising again, and that's why the plant is planning to use salt water. Azuma worries that salt water may have impurities capable of triggering an explosion, but the discussion about the risks is interrupted by the arrival of Murakami, who wants to discuss the rolling blackouts.
He explains that they must avoid a power peak, or they won't have power to eventually restart each station, and the only way to avoid that is to split the Kanto area into 5 groups implementing blackouts one by one. While they argue over the dangers of leaving hospitals and people on life support without power, an official calls Yoshida to tell him to stop the salt water plant, but Yoshida refuses.
The other officials tell Taku to go ahead with the rolling blackouts. If somebody dies, it'll be their responsibility. The news reached the Taku headquarters, and since they don't want to be charged with murder, they'll cut power to their high demand.
Plans to adjust.
Then Tapa calls the plant to stop the plan, and after a long argument, Yoshida has no choice but to suspend all saltwater injection and move the hose to the little fresh water left.
However, the workers are still pumping salt water because this was part of the plan.
Yoshida had only been acting for Tapu after a few seconds of pumping the water. Level rises, and the mission works out a few hours later. Azuma approves the use of salt water. However, no matter how many times they check the hose in the connection, it seems the water levels won't rise anymore, which means the water isn't getting inside. 2 workers are sent to find the problem, and when they come back they report that there must be a leak somewhere because the pressure inside the reactor is rising. After a chat with Topco, it's decided they'll send people to try the valves again.
A team goes to the unit suppression chamber and another aftershock shakes the bridge, but luckily is a light one and they can keep moving.
They go deeper inside and are shocked to notice their shows are melting, plus the meter suddenly starts going crazy, so they have no choice but to go back.
Yoshida calls Taka to warn them of the possibility of a total meltdown, and he's given orders to do whatever it takes to find the valve and unit.
Yoshida checks the manuals and decides they'll try to use a bunch of car batteries to activate the valve.
The batteries are sent to the control room where they are connected together in one DIN circuit, then they connect them to the main computer, but unfortunately the activation doesn't work.
They'll have to look for more batteries to add more power. Meanwhile, additional fire trucks have arrived, but they'll have to clean lots of debris before they are able to run the hose. Yoshida notices that the pressure in the containment vessel is crossing the limit, so they need to hurry. An hour later, Yoshida reports to Tako that the batteries work and the valve and unit has been opened.
So nuclear reactor pressure has begun dropping. Murakami orders Yoshida to resume operations, so Yoshida has no choice but to order the workers to resume injecting water instead of evacuating. This time the water flows better, confirming it's entering the vessel properly near on it. The workers hurry to clean the debris as soon as possible, and the new fire trucks finally reach the area.
Suddenly the building starts shaking, and Yoshida runs to the window to confirm his bad feeling.
Another explosion has destroyed on it. The workers in the fire truck are alive and notice
the radiation levels are going up incredibly fast, so they have to kick the door open to leave the vehicle. They go
looking for the other truck and rescue more workers from where they hid under it. Many of them are injured, but luckily nobody is dead.
The truck won't start, so they abandon it and run back to the offices. On their way back,
they find many other workers with deadly injuries, telling them not to worry about them, but the group ignores their warnings and helps them come along anyway.
The second explosion also appears on the news and starts to deeply worry.
The population in the office.
Yoshida receives an update saying that unit's temperature is rising, so the explosion must have caused a leak.
The water level in unit is also starting to drop, so they only have 5 hours before the fuel rods are exposed again in Tokyo.
Azuma realizes they'll have to rise the disaster level to 7, which is the first time since Chernobyl. At that moment, all the injured workers arrive at the office using a vehicle they found around the employees at the entrance, check on them, and discover the contamination is too high to even diagnose them.
Yoshida learns the fire truck is no longer operable, but the pumps still work, so a few workers are trying to maintain injection into unit.
Unfortunately, the explosion closed the valve and the car batteries aren't working anymore. The number of exposed fuel rods is quickly rising, but they are located on the 5th floor of each reactor building, meaning that to reach them, they would have to go over a radiated debris, and the containment vessel could burst at any moment. Overwhelmed by stress, Yoshida decides to concentrate on getting the unit valve open and resume work on it, and because they are short on time in Tokyo.
Another press conference is being held to discuss the second explosion, but they still say that the amount of radioactive material being dispersed is low. On the internet, rumors and panic spread, and everyone assumes the country is already doomed. People are blaming the problems on employees, their attitude being almost like a witch hunt hosts and for spreading similar messages, which hurts the relatives of the employees moments later.
The unit valve still hasn't been opened, and argument ensues between Murakami and Yoshida over how to proceed, causing Yoshida to finally lose it and yell at the top of the team, telling them he'll choose what's best for his team before hanging up. A bus arrives to take away the injured people, but even at full capacity,
It can't take them all.
Suddenly a worker announces they've found salt water buildup in the basement of unit, so they'll try to move it to the pit to cool the reactors. Now it's time to move more debris and move the fire trucks to units 5 and 6. They'll also have to gather some manpower to break down the door to unit workers, and heavy machinery begin working as fast as they can, only to discover they don't have enough hose left to reach the basement. At that moment, the control room calls to inform that unit's fuel rods are all exposed, so Yoshida tells his assistant to start preparing the evacuation. Afterwards, Yoshida calls Topta to inform them he and a minimum number of operators will stay to keep injecting waters, but he wants everyone else to be evacuated. Now Yoshida has the difficult decision of choosing who will stay with him until the very end. When Azuma hears about this plan, he panics and yells at everyone, not calming down until he understands that the plant will be completely abandoned and a few men will still stay behind. Moments later, Azuma shows up at Topco and complains about all the miscommunication, so he announces he'll work there as chief of operations.
From now on, he wants everyone to be ready to die on site, including himself, just to make a point.
Yoshida lowers his pants and scratches his rear for the camera before telling everyone to resume work.
Sometime later, workers in the control room are trying to change the gauge battery, when suddenly the building shakes and they hear the sound of an explosion.
They inform Yoshida that the suppression chamber pressure has dropped to 0, which could mean there's a hole in it. The radiation level is increasing, so Yoshida sends the men to check the parameters.
Then and also report a concussive sound, meaning
the radiation will skyrocket. Giving up, Yoshida calls Topco, and Murakami approves the evacuation of most of the workers, to Azuma's horror. Yoshida officially announces the evacuation and tells the leaders of each team to choose a man that will stay behind soon.
The buses arrive at the plant, and the employees say their final goodbyes to the men.
Saying behind afterward, Yoshida allows the remaining group to contact their families before going back to work. A helicopter sent by a newscast begins flying above the plant, and reporters talk about all the foreigners in the country returning home, which is overcrowding. The airport outside, workers have finished cleaning the debris to start a new hose connection, but for some reason the water isn't pumping.
While Yoshida tells them to keep trying, Azuma has a special advisor for his opinion because he's considering pulling off a coal shut-on, but he can't be sure they'll get the reactors under control. The adversar shows them.
What will happen if the reactors explode, covering an area of above kilometers?
This means forced relocation is a must for that circle, and the circle outside that reaches their thought. Kilometers must be evacuated and kept off limits. They'll become uninhabitable for the new few decades, and the Japanese economy will cease functioning.
Only the south and the north of the country would remain moments later.
Azuma meets with the Minister of Defense, who has sent an aircraft for reconnaissance and decided further.
Work is impossible because of the radiation levels.
Azuma insists that pumping water from the sky is their only solution, but the minister is worried about another hydrogen explosion. Then Azuma points out that the country is in danger and they'll be vulnerable to foreign attacks. If they don't solve this, so the minister agrees to send another aircraft to find an alternative at the plant.
The workers keep trying to fix the truck to no avail.
Yoshida calls an expert to ask for tips, only to be told it's a complicated procedure that couldn't be done by only 4 people in the dark. The expert offers to come over to fix it himself, but Yoshida can't allow a sacrifice like that and hangs up after thanking him moments.
Later, white smoke is seen coming out from Unit.
Apparently, the pool water has begun evaporating. Meanwhile, Azuma is speaking to the president of the US, who had sent a message to all the Americans in Japan asking them to come back. Azuma begs for the president to stop causing more panic, but the president asks in return for the disclosure of all information regarding the plant and for the American nuclear experts to be allowed to sit in Azuma's policy meetings.
None of the officials like it, but Azuma thinks it's a priority to stop the Americans from leaving moments later.
The volume of white smoke begins to decrease, which is a bad sign because it means the pool water has bottomed out.
Yoshida checks with the workers by the truck, but the house still doesn't work when they are about to lose all hope.
The expert shows up at the plant explaining he's willing to take the risk if it means saving his family, which lives in the area.
In the meantime, military aircrafts are getting ready a new kind of material that will allow them to block the radiation at certain distances.
So the Minister of Defense confirms to Azuma that he'll help at the plant. Yoshida wants to find a way to get water to the 5th floor of the reactor building. At that moment, he gets a message from Topco explaining that construction companies are offering their mobile pumps to help, and they immediately arrange the delivery. The Army soldiers are making a plan to sprinkle the water, and caution is given about the westerly winds in the area when the aircrafts finally arrive.
They flee carefully by keeping an eye on the radiation levels, and the first water dump is a success.
The second dump soon follows, and the Army leaves as soon as they are done. Next, the expert fixes the fire truck, and workers begin moving the mobile pumps, allowing them to spread water all over the units. An hour later, they confirm they've injected nearly tons of water, while the teams celebrate another aftershock hits the building.
But thankfully, everything is fine.
Azuma calls the American president with the good news, but the president still refuses to cancel the call for evacuation for the following days.
The administration endures bashing from the media, accusing them of hiding the truth and having lost the audience with the USA. However, American and Japanese cooperation accelerates from that day forward, and the USA sends a fleet of naval vessels to provide support, including nuclear experts and lots of equipment. The plant keeps injecting water non-stop with the help of many great people. Soon a team of Pausen comes together at Topco's headquarters and forms a system capable of organized response. After lots of hard work, power finally returns to the control room, and the reactors stabilize, allowing the team to finally leave the building. To this day, they still aren't sure why the reactors stabilized so easily after losing control days later. It's confirmed. Only 2 people have died in the incident, and the bodies are sent to the families for a proper funeral. However, their co-workers can attend because they still are working non-stop on cooling the units.
All this began on March 12th, and by April they're still there. The power plant is being dismantled, which requires as many years or even more than it took to build it.
6 years later in Untold, there still is a high volume of unused nuclear fuel remaining in the reactors, and no human can approach.
Its numbers indicate that the levels are even higher than in Hiroshima by Ville.
They finally learned that they could move the most dangerous debris, but they don't know where to store it. They don't know how long it'll take to decommission the reactors either, and the residents that used to live in the area have already abandoned their dwellings. Thousands of houses are left empty, domestic livestock lost their owners, and all perished. But wild animals seem livelier than ever because they are reclaiming their habitat.
After the incident, cancer took Yoshida's body, most probably because of radiation poisoning, although Yoshida thinks it was his smoking. He's also put under investigation by a committee. But what matters the most to Yoshida is to pass this story to future generations.
In fact, Yoshida dies at the age of, and the story is published under the title The Yoshida Testimony, now in fact.
The aftermath of the incident is still unresolved in the work of decommissioning continues to this day. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.